In this case, I used a #1 palette knife, a hand and fingered palette knife, and a thin brush to work out the details. The painting is done in the style of a child's drawing and features 2 pink flowers against a blue sky with a bright yellow sun and 2 birds in flight. The background has a texture of crumpled paper with shades of blue and green, which adds an effect of slight carelessness and volume. Now let's look at the process of creating the painting step by step. Preparation of materials. Before starting work, I prepared a sheet of thick A3 paper, acrylic paints, blue, green, white, yellow, pink, orange, black, palette knife #1 for broad strokes, a hand and fingered palette knife for texture elements, a thin brush for details, a palette, water to thin the paint, a rag or napkins to clean the tools. The background plays an important role in the perception of the painting, so I paid special attention to it. Base color. I mixed white paint with a small amount of blue to create a light blue shade. Then, using a #1 palette knife, I applied the paint in broad strokes, creating smooth transitions, adding texture. To imitate crumpled paper, I slightly crumpled the sheet before applying the paint, and then unfolded it. On top of the light blue, I added chaotic strokes of green and white, applying them in a thin layer using a hand-shaped palette knife. Shading. To smooth out sharp transitions, I used a palette knife and partially smeared the paint, creating the effect of natural color mixing. Creating the buds. The central element of the painting are 2 pink flowers. Shape of the buds. Using a hand and finger palette knife, I shaped the flowers using light pink paint, volume and shades. To create depth, I added a darker pink around the edges of the buds, leaving a lighter color in the center, flower center. I applied a small amount of orange paint with a fine brush, forming neat dots in the center of the buds. Petal texture. Using a palette knife shaped like a hand with fingers, I painted light strokes, giving the petals dynamics. After finishing the buds, I moved on to painting the stems and foliage. Stems. Using a fine brush and a mixture of green and yellow, I painted long, slightly curved lines leading from the bottom of the leaf to the flowers. Leaves. Using a #1 palette knife, I painted dark green strokes, setting the general shape of the leaves, and then used a brush to detail the veins, highlights, and shadows. I added light green shades along the edges of the leaves, and dark green to indicate the shadows at the base. The sun in the painting is partially hidden behind the flowers, which creates the feeling of a warm summer day. Using my finger, I painted a semicircle at the top of the leaf, using a rich yellow. Shading. I smoothly smudged the edges of the yellow color to make the sun look soft and natural. To complete the composition, I added 2 flying birds. Outlines. I used a thin brush with black paint to draw silhouettes of the birds in the shape of the letter V. Detail. I added smooth curves with small strokes to make the birds look natural. Correction. I slightly lightened the wings with a gray shade so that they harmoniously fit into the picture. The picture turned out to be lively, bright, and filled with childish spontaneity. The use of various tools allowed me to create an interesting texture and depth, and the contrasting colors made the composition expressive. This work is perfect for decorating a child's room or just to lift the mood. The main thing when creating such paintings is not to be afraid to experiment with strokes, textures, and shades. Acrylic paints dry quickly, which allows you to make adjustments as you work. I hope this description will help you create your own version of this bright and kind picture. Critical analysis of the painting. This painting conveys childish sincerity and joy through bright colors and an unusual technique. It is clear that the artist has experimented with texture and tools, using palette knives and a brush, which makes the work lively and textural. The composition is built around 2 colors that occupy a central place. They are slightly asymmetrical, but this adds dynamics, not disharmony. The sun at the top balances the picture, and the 2 birds make the space more alive. However, the background seems a little overloaded. The white gaps in the blue sky create an airy effect, but in some places they look too sharp, like accidental omissions, not intentional brush strokes. Perhaps smoother transitions would make the composition softer. The colors are bright and cheerful, which matches the childish style. The blue sky creates a feeling of freshness, but because of the sharp white brush strokes, it seems a little torn. The pink flowers stand out from the background, and the orange centers add contrast. However, the stems and leaves look a little rough. More shades of green could be added to give them volume. The yellow sun is an accent element, but it's applied a little carelessly. Perhaps if the contours were a little softer or smoother, it would fit into the overall picture better. Technique and texture. Using a palette knife for the background is a good solution. The brush strokes create the illusion of clouds moving. But in some places, the paint is too rough, which makes the sky seem unnatural. The handprints for the petals are a very interesting idea. It gives the flowers personality, but they look a little sloppy. The petals are of different shapes and thicknesses. Perhaps if their edges were clearer, the flowers would look more expressive. Mood and style. The painting conveys a feeling of lightness, carelessness, and spring warmth. This is emphasized by the simplicity of the form and the richness of the colors. However, due to the overload of textures, the background begins to compete with the flowers for the viewer's attention, which distracts a little from the main plot. The work turned out to be expressive, warm, and emotional. It clearly carries joy and an experimental spirit, but there are points that could be improved. Softer transitions in the sky for harmony. More detailed stems and leaves for realism. More clearly drawn petals to make the flowers look more expressive. Smoother contours of the sun for accuracy. This painting is good precisely for its naive spontaneity, and its liveliness is more important than technical perfection. Next time you can try to add more details and smoothness to make it even more expressive.